My name is Professor Joseph Grant. I am a full professor of law here at FAMU College of Law. I think my love for baseball started when I was very, very young. My father's oldest brother, a veteran of World War II, was an avid sports fan. He loved the Cleveland Indians and lived and died by their performance. And he was very influential in my life. He imparted, I think, a love for the sport. As I grew up and started to get involved in athletics as a young kid, baseball was naturally the thing that I gravitated towards. I also have an uncle on my mother's side of the family who played baseball. So as I was growing up and developing, he imparted some of his knowledge and some of his skills and wisdom with respect to the game. As I further developed in the sport, I was influenced by some really remarkable men. There was a gentleman in my community, a gentleman named Johnny Roscoe. He played in the Negro Leagues. He was actually a player on the Cleveland Buckeyes team, and he was my baseball coach. He was my first baseball coach, in fact. And this man did so much in our community. He taught values and wonderful skills and life skills to young men in the community, and was very influential in my life. The Negro Leagues were really phenomenal. Both of my parents come from the Jim Crow South. Both of my parents were born in Alabama in the 1930s, and they saw a lot of discrimination, a lot of segregation. Unfortunately, there was a color line in baseball that prevailed for a number of years. So African Americans were shut out of opportunities in the major leagues. The Negro Leagues became one of the most important outlets for African Americans with regard to the sport of baseball in many cities like Kansas City, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Memphis, and other cities throughout the South, New York. Negro League baseball clubs were some of the most important businesses in the African American community. There were some really industrial, entrepreneurial individuals who formed teams and took on the business of baseball. And this gave an outlet for many young men during that time to better themselves, to be involved in a team sport, and to influence their community. So the Negro Leagues were really, really highly influential in the African American community. Segregation, again, left an indelible mark on our society. Because of our basically apartheid system here in the United States, many things had to be duplicated. Unfortunately, when you talk about business endeavors, baseball was one of those things. So the legal structure, again, kept African Americans out of a lot of positions. There were no opportunities in the major leagues. There were no opportunities in other types of sports because of color lines. So again, when you don't have opportunity, you have to create opportunity for yourself. That's a remarkable thing about many of these African American men and women who took on the business of baseball during the Jim Crow era. They created something where there was nothing. So I'm an avid baseball fan. It's really ironic as we sit here today having this discussion. Yesterday marked the 72nd anniversary of Jackie Robinson. Jackie Robinson debuted on April 15th, 1947, and it was a ground-shaking day for African Americans. Ironically, on that day in 1947, there were 26,000 people at Ebbets Field to watch Jackie Robinson's debut. Out of that crowd, 14,000 were African Americans. So it just tells you how many people were following Jackie Robinson. When he made his debut, it was a ground-shaking day and a monumental day, a landmark day for African Americans in the United States. It showed glimmers of hope that maybe if we can integrate baseball, there might be opportunities in a larger society. So for me, when I look back on Jackie Robinson's mark and his legacy, I was influenced by the people that came after him. He opened so many doors. As you can see on my wall, I have a photograph of Larry Doby. He was the first African American to play in the American leagues. He debuted after Jackie Robinson. He was the second African American to play in the major leagues. And fortunately, he played for my hometown team, the Cleveland Indians. We had one of our best years in 1948 when he debuted. He didn't play much that year, but the Indians won the World Series in 1948, which is one of the last championships we had in that city other than the 2016 Cavaliers victory. So on my wall you see Larry Doby. Next to Larry Doby I have a picture of Monty Irvin, who was one of the great New York Giants players, one of the first African Americans signed with that team. I also have a picture of Ferguson Jenkins, who played for the Philadelphia Phillies, and he again was one of the first African Americans on their team. And next to Ferguson Jenkins I have a picture of Buck O'Neil. Buck O'Neil was a colorful character. He had a long legacy in baseball that spanned decades. In his own right, he was a phenomenal player, but shut out of opportunities because of the color line in baseball. But he went on and had a career in the major leagues as a scout and as a coach for major league teams. Next to Buck O'Neil, you have a picture of Buck Leonard, who was again one of the great African American players in the Negro Leagues. So these men influenced me in so many different ways. You know, I pay homage to them through the photographs that I have in my office. The remarkable story about the Negro Leagues is that, again, where doors were closed, people made opportunities. But I think the larger story about this, this journey through baseball that African Americans have had in American history is a story about diversity. It just goes to show that with diversity, society can move forward. Again, when I shared those numbers a moment ago about Jackie Robinson's debut, and when you look at the raw numbers, you had over 26,000 fans in this, in the stadium at Ebbets Field that day, one of their largest crowds. 14,000 of those individuals were African American. Branch Rickey saw something. It wasn't all about black and white. Honestly, in America, a lot of things come down to green. Diversity works, and when Major League Baseball embraced diversity, they were able to broaden their audience, and reach a larger market and reach a larger world, quite honestly. When you look at the state of baseball today, it's a sport that's international. There are people of color in baseball from the Caribbean, from South America, from all over the world. There are people in baseball from Japan, from Korea. So it just goes to show that when you open up, there are opportunities for others, and others will step through those doors. Sometimes all it takes is getting a foot through the door or an arm through the door, and then eventually you get the body through the door.